Thanks for joining us here at WeatherNation for continued coverage of Hurricane Dorian, now moving up the eastern seaboard of the United States. Places like Charleston, South Carolina, already feeling some of the impacts of this storm, but we still have a ways to go before we are done with the story of Dorian.
Yeah, and Dorian starting to make its presence felt there in Charleston, South Carolina. Picked up about 1.5 inches of rainfall so far there this morning. That rain likely only to get worse there in the Charleston area. So we're tracking it for you, of course, right here on WeatherNation. The heaviest of the rain likely for us in Jacksonville, Florida, and far southeast Georgia right now. Let's take a look at it here on our Viper radar, where we can pretty clearly see Dorian's eye lurking about 100 miles or so offshore from Jacksonville. The eye wall, again, remaining a reasonably healthy distance offshore here. That's where the strongest winds are, but these outer bands, some of these feeder bands are pretty strong, and looks like we're about to get a pretty decent one moving its way onshore there through Fernandina Beach, Amelia Island, and south to Jacksonville Beach. This would be coastal St. Johns County and Flagler County, where we could be seeing some stronger showers and storms here over the next hour or so. We've seen likely about 3 to 5 inches worth of rainfall, so we start adding inch an hour, 1.5 inches, or maybe even 2 inch per hour rates into this part of Florida, and we could start to see some flood issues for us. But broadening things on out with our radar picture, and we are starting to see some of that heavier rainfall move its way into southeast Georgia. This would be the Golden Isles on north through the Savannah area, Pooler, Georgia, Hilton Head. As I mentioned, Charleston, we picked up about 1.5 inches, a little less than 1.5 inches of rainfall so far here today. But that rain, again, just starting to get going for us, as, again, we still got a little whiles to go. So for you in Charleston, we've still, again, got about 150 miles or so from the center of the storm. And for us here in Charleston, this storm still got a bit of a westward push to it, and we expect a kind of a hook up to the north and east. So that does mean that for Charleston, likely for the next day, day and a half, we'll be dealing with some very heavy rainfall, and flooding will be a big concern coupled with the storm surge. Jacksonville on south here through the first coast, things are starting to taper on down once you get south of, we'll call it Flagler Beach. Once you get south of there through Volusia and Brevard counties, things are starting to get a bit better for us, though there is still that threat for some storm surge and some coastal flooding in the coastal parts of Duval, as well as on up into Nassau counties there in far northeast Florida. And then up here to the north and the kind of fringes here of Dorian, and we're just starting to get some of that rainfall here and through the Outer Banks from Cape Fear on north through Pamlico Sound. Again, the rain only picks up from here, folks. We're still going to be about a day, day and a half out. Looks like tomorrow night would be the possibility for landfall here on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. So we still got a long ways to go in terms of this storm. So again, look out for the flooding, the storm surge, multitude of different hazards in association with Hurricane Dorian. In fact, let's go ahead and take a look at the forecast cone. And Viki, the cone does bring that storm pretty close to Charleston, likely sometime tomorrow, right?
It sure does, and we're really not ruling out that potential for landfall over the next couple of days. So those across coastal South Carolina, North Carolina need to be prepared for this storm to either stay offshore, skirt the coastline, or move inland, because when we talk about the cone, remember that that is only a 67% chance of the center of that storm staying within inside this cone. But due to the sheer size of this storm, we're going to feel the impacts well outside of these outside lines, because the cone has nothing to do with storm size. So that's what's a little confusing. So when we're talking about this forecast inching ever so closely to the coastlines of the Carolinas, we could easily be dealing with that landfall, or potentially even pushing this system further inland and onshore. So a lot of things still left to be determined. I know, I wish we could give you that very pinpointed answer, but it has to do a lot with the upper level steering currents. When and if we're going to see that turn offshore is still left to be determined. So that's why preparations, evacuations have been underway in the Carolinas. All the way up and down the coastline, you see this red, that's our hurricane warning, expecting those Cat 1 to Cat 2 hurricane conditions to start arriving for folks in southeastern South Carolina later today and into tonight. And then the further north you live, the more delayed that arrival will be for you. But notice how now we're expanding those alerts up into places like Virginia. And we could even see these watches and warnings ride further up towards the Delmarva and even into the mid-Atlantic. So still a long ways ways to go with this storm. But I also want you to notice how many of those tropical alerts we have inland as well. Tropical storm warnings, meaning tropical storm force conditions. Those sustained winds in excess of 35 miles per hour are expected almost all the way inland to the state capital of South Carolina. So we're going to feel the impacts pretty far inland from this particular storm. Again, those tropical storm force winds very likely, almost a guarantee here across the outer shores of the Carolinas, but look how far inland we could experience those tropical storm force winds. Now, tropical alerts, it all has to do with the actual wind speed of a storm, but there are a lot of other elements that go along with tropical systems. Of course, storm surge is a big one, especially for the coastal cities of the Carolinas, very susceptible to flooding as well as that storm surge inundation. So that's why we have these warnings in place, because the water is just going to continue to get pushed inland as this system approaches from the south. So we've got a lot of different moving parts. Okay, so we've talked about winds and we've talked about the potential for storm surge. But now we also have to worry about what's going on up in the atmosphere. We've got a lot of heavy rain associated with this system. We're already seeing those rainfall totals start to stack up. And folks, we've barely begun in South Carolina and North Carolina. Notice how far inland these rain bands are going to stretch, and it's going to come down hard at times, which means that it's going to stack up quickly and potentially also bring a threat for isolated rotation. Here's a look at potential forecast rainfall. Not ruling out 10+ inches of rain across portions of the Carolinas and up into Virginia. We will continue to update you on that forecast, and we are awaiting an update from the South Carolina governor on Hurricane Dorian.